we started this company called Wild Carrot Herbals in 2001. And I've been making skincare since 1993. I had back to the lander parents. They were redneck back to the landers. And they were really into self-sufficiency. So my parents grew a huge garden. They grew all their own food, and they were really into, my father in particular was really into fishing, hunting, and harvesting wild plants. And I think that that was the seed that really was planted in me of, just going out and foraging and having that relationship with this wild, beautiful place that we call home. I grew up in Oregon. I'm fifth generation Oregonian. My father he was a logger at some point in his life. He worked at the mill. He was really into fishing and really into mushrooms and Yule Gibbons. He was always reading Yule Gibbons books to me. And that's how it really started. And then as any teenager or young person, you completely forget about those pieces, that part of your life. I really wasn't into plants for a really long time, and I traveled up to Olympia, Washington, and I went to college. I went to the Evergreen State College, and I studied botany, and I fell in love with moss. Moss was my passion. And I went to the Evergreen State College, and the botanist went on sabbatical. And I didn't start school till I was 25. And I, at this point, really just wanted to be done with what I said I was going to do, which was to get a college degree. And there was the organic farm program, and that was the closest thing. I thought, well, it's working with plants. So I decided to give it a shot. And at Evergreen, they have what's called a coordinated studies program. So you take that program for a whole year, and that's your chemistry, your botany, your science, your literature, all of that. And so I studied organic farming, and I fell completely and totally in love. And on that farm, that farm had been around. It was one of the first organic farm programs in the country. And on that farm, they had this really cool old medicinal herb garden that was completely covered up by blackberries. And we uncovered it and started to watch all these plants come to life and unfurl. And I just fell in love. I totally fell in love with comfrey, and I fell in love with plantain and its handiness when we were stung by bees or had some sort of itchy rash. And so truly my relationship with this product line, with this company, has come from the ground up. That's where my passion really got sparked, was at Evergreen. And I was living on the land. I was totally doing the hippie thing. I had no running water or electricity, and I was living in a little cabin in the woods, and I kayaked to school every day, and I would drag my kayak up into the woods and walk through the woods to school and farm. It was a pretty great time. So when I was living in the woods with no running water or electricity, I had this thing called time. Even though I was farming, I didn't have a car. I didn't have all those distractions. I wasn't making much money, so I was just keeping it really simple. And I started reading books on medicinal plants, and I found Rosemary Gladstar's recipe on her perfect cream, and I made a cream, and I made a salve, and I think with a lot of people who work with botanicals, they just fall in love. They totally fall in love, and I was smitten. So I spent 10 years trying to convince myself that that was not a possibility, that was not a viable, responsible, grown-up thing to do, was to, make salve and make creams and do all of that, that I was just trying to be, I was just a hippie, But anyway, it just kept growing. My sisters would have children, and they would need something for diaper rash, or, I made a healing salve that we found worked really well on animals and worked on people. And when I was living on the land, I had this boyfriend, and we had probably 2 acres of blackberries that we decided to clear by hand. And we just got in this flow, and we were clearing blackberries, and our hands were just shredded, totally shredded. And so I made a product to work on our shredded hands. And that was the Lord, My Hands Are So Dry lotion that we still make today. It's the exact same recipe. It's our top selling lotion. It works really well. It has all these botanicals in it and lanolin and cocoa butter, and it smells great, but it actually will address, cracked, chapped hands. It's not just because it smells good or it feels good. It actually has a lot of St. John's wort. It actually helps heal the hands. And so I started to make more and more for friends and family. And then, so while I was trying to convince myself that I wasn't supposed to do, that following your passion wasn't logical somehow, I had a corporate job. And so I sold copiers and I sold supplies and I commuted and I sat in traffic for hours and cried, and I'd see a heron fly over the top of my truck when I was completely at a standstill for an hour and a half, and I would just burst into tears and just think, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And there was just this voice that just kept telling me that, you're supposed to suffer. That this is what, this is a grown-up decision, and this corporate thing, this money will bring you happiness. And I realized that I couldn't do it anymore. I felt like my soul was just dying. And I quit, and I started Wild Carrot. And so then I started making more products and formulating more, and I totally started in the kitchen. And then I moved out into the little ADU. We had a little garage. Then we set up a secondary kitchen. And so I thought I was all grown up, because I had this little secondary kitchen. And that actually worked really well for us for quite some time. And in that time, I got married to the man who I had met when I was in college. We were actually best friends. And he was the most amazing organic farmer and the most amazing pot grower is also. But he and I got married, and he completely stood behind me and helped support me while I got Wild Carrot on its feet. And let's see, how many years is that? This is our 18th year. In 2000, actually, is when we started Wild Carrot. So this is our 18th year of being in business. I consider the Clackamas River my childhood home. I fished in the mornings before school. I fished with boyfriends after school and girlfriends and my dad. I just was consumed by the river. That was where I spent summers and winters. And then I made the big move across the Columbia River into Washington. That was my big move away from home, and my parents were totally mortified that I was going to become a Washingtonian. And I didn't even know that, that would somehow change who you are. I just thought, well, of course I'm still an Oregonian. So I moved to Seattle. And then when I was in Seattle, I moved back to Olympia to go to college. And then when I was in Olympia, I moved back to Seattle to work this corporate job. My boyfriend was studying architecture, and so we moved up there together. And it was in Seattle that I really started the copier world. And we lived in South Seattle. We lived right on Lake Washington. And I would have to drive 12 miles, and sometimes it would take an hour and a half.
Hey, I'll see you later.
Hi, baby.
You're going to be a movie star.
Oh, boy. So I worked in Bellevue, and I lived in Seattle. And I commuted in a car. I tried commuting on a bicycle, and it was like taking your life in your own hands. It was truly not a very safe move. But I worked in an office with 400 people. I had real plants in my office, and they would do tours of the office and show people this total freak that had a real plant in the office. They just thought I was crazy. And, it's interesting. I really feel like, so I had this picture of a tractor. I really wanted a Kubota tractor. And that was my dream. And so I took a picture of myself and I cut it out and I put myself driving that Kubota tractor. And I put that on the wall in my cube in this foreign place with all my sticky notes. I'd never used a phone that had more than one line. I'd never used a fax machine. I was, I truly, they thought I was like Tarzan, truly. because I'd been living without running water or electricity, and now I was living in an office, on a computer and a phone. I'd never used a computer other than writing my final paper in college. So anyway, I was really out of my element, and but I learned so much. And that picture, having that picture on the wall and looking at that picture every day, I really felt like that was such a great lesson in manifestation, because 10 years later, I got that Kubota tractor, and I was on that farm, and I was madly in love, and I had all those pieces. I was growing plants, and I was doing those things that I really, really knew fed my soul. But I really put myself through the trenches. But in that time that I was in the corporate world, I learned how to print a label. I learned how to operate all this equipment. So I really felt, and I learned sales skills. And so, I always wondered why I was doing what I was doing. And I was successful in sales, but it wasn't my passion. It wasn't my calling. I felt like on some level I was, compromising myself, and that I was dying essentially inside. But I learned all these amazing tools. And so when I got to making my skincare line, I could walk into a store and I could talk to a buyer, and I could approach them about my products, and I understood margins and price points and wholesale pricing and retail pricing, and I understood a little bit about merchandising, and I was printing my own labels. I knew how to make a label that didn't rub off, those kinds of things. So it was a necessary part of my journey. I was just gleaning all these little pearls of information that, I ended up working at a nursery when I was living down on the land, and it was really cool. It was an organic fruit and nut orchard, and it was a family-run business, and I learned so much from them about how to bring a business into your home, how to incorporate that. I learned how to ship trees. Shipping trees is really difficult, but I learned about, shipping fragile glass and how to wrap it up and how to print a shipping label, all those things. So there were all these little pieces that were falling into place that allowed me to grow this business. I don't think I realized what it really could become. I thought it would just be this little side passion that, maybe it would be enough to sustain me. And certainly it was plenty to sustain my spirit and to sustain my heart. And for that, I was incredibly grateful. But I never really thought that it would be this company, that we were able to buy a building on Main Street in a town, that we would have 9 employees, that it would support my whole family. I never realized what it could potentially become. And I always knew that it was good. I always knew, Wild Carrot, the name of the company, Wild Carrot is Queen Anne's lace. And I used to work with flowers, and I used to do little subscription bouquets and deliver them to offices and homes. And on my way of doing my deliveries, I would pick Queen Anne's lace because I loved it as a filler for bouquets. And I just loved it as a symbol because it's abundant, it grows along roadsides, it has an edible taproot, it has these amazing seeds that wild birds completely feed themselves on. And those gorgeous baskets in the fall when they dry. So when I decided to name our company Wild Carrot, it was really about that symbol of abundance and natural beauty that I was thinking of. And so I never really doubted her in that way. I really felt that she would provide, but I didn't realize just how much. And I'm ever so grateful.